Hear me? Okay. My name is Salah Al-Haggar. I'm a professor of energy and sustainable development at the American University in Cairo, and also I am the president of Egypt Green Building Council. It is a non-for-profit organization founded in 2012. I will moderate this session, inshallah. Now, the title of the session is Building to COP27, Accelerating Climate Solutions Through Sustainable Built Environment in the Middle East and Africa. It gives me a great pleasure to introduce the 4 international experts, not only in sustainability, but also in climate change, green buildings, green cities, and net zero. Net zero, as you know, it is the only solution to climate change, as I discussed in my previous webinar in July 6th. And if you are interested, it is already on the YouTube under Egypt Green Building Council. Now, I will start with introducing the panelists. First, we have Victoria Boros. She is Director, Advanced Net Zero, World Green Building Council. Welcome, Victoria. We have also Bex Porter. She is Built Environment Lead, United Nations High-Level Climate Champion. Welcome, Bex. And we have Nora Surar. She is a Program Management Officer, United Nations Environmental Program. Welcome, Nora. We have Derbala Hone. She is Senior Manager, COP27 Engagement, and the United Nations High-Level Climate Champion Team Liaison, and also C40 cities. Welcome, Derbala. I will start with the first round of questions. I will start with Victoria. Who is the Building to COP coalition, and what is the coalition's primary goal?
Thank you, Dr. Salah. Thank you for this incredible hospitality and for inviting us here today. I think our biggest takeaway from this trip to Cairo is that we have to come back again very soon and for longer. So I think this won't be the last that you see of us, but we're thrilled to be here and to have this opportunity. So yes, the Building to COP coalition, made up of us, but also many others. It is a coalition of global networks who are working in the space of buildings and construction. We have around 11 members of the wider coalition, and then we have a few core partners who sort of work together very closely to try and bring buildings as a critical climate solution to the COP process and the COP agenda. We all represent different stakeholders across the value chain of the building and construction sector. So Dervla here is from C40 as the cities network. Nora works with lots of national governments, and the World Green Building Council, who has many national level Green Building Council members, of course, Egypt, GBC being one of them, has lots of business members. And it's our role as the Building to COP coalition to showcase the front runner action of leading businesses, cities, states and regions and national governments to show what's possible, what's necessary to address emissions from the building and construction sector and to enhance resilience from our sector, both existing buildings and new buildings, bring all of those wonderful stories of action to COP and use it to call for bolder and more ambitious regulations from national governments. So we had our first cities, regions and built environment day, the first one since COP21 in 2015, last year at COP26. And so we're sort of here wanting to make sure that buildings has its moment again at COP27.
Thank you, Victoria. You attended COP26 in last year. What did you manage to achieve in COP26, and what's important that you have a common voice and shared ambition?
Yeah. So for a long time, buildings has not been represented on the sort of official agenda and program at COP. There was a Buildings Day at COP21 in 2015, and then there's been kind of side events related to the human settlements process and under the Marrakesh partnerships, but it hasn't had its moment. And when we were sort of gifted Cities, Regions and Built Environment Day by last year's COP presidency, the UK government. We took full advantage of that opportunity, and we held sort of specific events as the coalition, and we were supporting events that the COP presidency was hosting, but also the entire building and construction community came together for this opportunity. We had around 200 events happening across the 2 weeks just on the built environment, and they were in all different zones of COP. They were within the blue zone, within the green zone. We supported the presidency directly on delivering some plenary sessions, which really importantly brought together CEOs and mayors and ministers that were already taking action to address emissions from the built environments within their portfolios or within their jurisdictions, to talk to each other and sort of share and exchange some of the actions that they've been taking and inspire others in the room to do the same. So yeah, we really took the opportunity of that Cities, Regions and Built Environment Day, really used it to showcase the front runner action from all different stakeholders, because there is good stuff happening, right?
Okay.
And just to sort of pick up on the common voice question, that's the reason why we formed the coalition, because there are lots of different organizations working in this space. We're very clear on what it is that we need to achieve as a sector. We have our 2030 and 2050 vision and goals, which actually is becoming more of an imperative. We have a huge amount of emissions to address from our sector. It's been a huge contributor to climate change, and now we need to flip that around and make sure that buildings and construction are an enormous solution to climate change, that we can address adaptation and resilience within our buildings, and we can drastically reduce the emissions that are caused by the sort of materials and construction processes and the use of buildings. But it is a very complex sector. The reason we're not seeing enough progress is because it's very difficult to achieve, and we know that. And so bringing all of these organizations together under the Building to COP coalition umbrella gives us the opportunity to create key messaging and a common voice that means we're all delivering the same simple message about what the sector needs to do. And hopefully that helps break down some of the complexity and challenges that some of those front-runner practitioners are finding out there in the field.
Okay, thank you, Victoria. And now we will move to the next with you. Advance a major political moment for enhancing action and ambition. And this year we called it COP for Africa and Middle East. Why COP27 is so important?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for having me here today at this beautiful, beautiful campus. As Dr. Salah said, so in terms of the COP processes, it's this COP in Africa is extremely critical. COP26 last year implemented in the Glasgow Pact, which was the name given to the negotiated text by all of the countries. In that text, it set out that actually countries need to ratchet their ambition, to scale up their ambition year on year. Before last year, that was a 5-year gap between each time that the countries needed to bring their nationally determined contributions and needed to bring their kind of increased ambition. So as of last year, each country now has 1 year to really scale up ambition. And so that's why COP27 will be so critical, because it will be the first time that those countries will have had to do that. And it will be really telling when we find out what they do bring to the table. I think the other reason that COP27 will be so critical, given its location in Africa, is that what we're talking about now is wanting to shift the narrative to implementation and action. COP26, there was huge ambition statements, which were fantastic, but it was ambition statements. There were some youth activists on the ground who said, okay, national governments, okay, city governments, okay, business, you've said you're doing this, now prove it. And this is really the year where that proof needs to come to the table. I think also in this continent, there is just such huge opportunity for growth and for innovation, and also for the youth of Africa. I read a statistic which blew my mind, which was that by 2050, half of the African population will be under 25. So this huge population of youth that really we need to ignite and get excited about developing the innovations, the technologies, the business sectors that we need to solve these really complex and really hard challenges. So there's a few reasons why I think this year is really critical.
Okay. Thank you, Bex. And another question, you and your group just came about a few days or a few hours ago.
Yeah.
Then, and you will be leaving to the airport right after this event, inshallah. Then the question is why is the building to COP collision in Cairo this week?
So Victoria said before that the coalition and the built environment community were sort of gifted Cities, Regions and Built Environment Day last year. But it wasn't quite as simple as that. You know, that was a lot of hard work by the coalition sitting either side of me, by stakeholders to effectively lobby the UK government to have built environment on the agenda. So that wasn't necessarily a gift. I would say that was a product of a lot of hard work. But we need to make sure that the built environment is also on the agenda this year. And as the climate champions, we have quite a unique mandate within the UN process, which is to which is to showcase the ambition and action of non-state actors, cities, regions, and business, and to bring them closer to the work of national governments. And in that bridging role, we have sector teams and the built environment lead. So part of my job is to bring those non-state actors within the built environment closer to the negotiations. Now, we've been working with the coalition to strategically set out what we think success would look like for the built environment at COP27. And we've been working hard to try and position that. Thankfully, we were then invited to meet with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which is one of the reasons we were here for a kind of 9-hour workshop yesterday. So we've all got bags under our eyes to try and make sure that we keep the built environment on the COP27 agenda, but also to demonstrate that we have the solutions as a sector, that we have the resource as a coalition and as a wider network of organizations to help the presidency showcase the great solutions that are out there and to support them in making sure this is kept on the agenda. So that's one of the reasons we were here, also to obviously meet as many stakeholders as we can on the ground, because we want to really hear the stories from Egypt, from Africa, so that we can make sure we're telling them at COP27.
Okay, thank you, Bex.
Thanks.
Now we move to Noura. Okay, from the global ABC perspective, how can we have successful regulation framework that lead to transforming buildings and the built environment? And what are the quick wins?
Yeah, thank you very much. And also from my side, thank you so much for welcoming us here. It's really a pleasure and it's been very insightful. So the Global ABC, let me just say, it's the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction, which is hosted by UNEP. And we are a network of networks. We welcome all stakeholders that are working towards the zero emission, efficient and resilient buildings and construction sector. So if we have any organizations here who are keen to join, you're most welcome to do so. To your question, I think Victoria said it very well, that we are looking at an extremely fragmented sector, the buildings and construction sector. I really loved an analogy that I heard once, that it is like passing the hot potato. Everyone along the value chain does a little bit. It's like basically says, oh yeah, I'm done. Next, please, hands off. And to change that, good regulation is critical. We really cannot address the entire value chain if we don't have some key pillars in place. And this is where national governments come in. Of course, on the ground, it is the private sector. Of course, the cities are very, very important also when it comes to enforcing, but it's the national governments who set the frameworks. And one thing that is critical is codes. It may not sound terribly exciting, but it really is critical. And if we just look at global figures, currently the number of countries that have mandatory building energy codes in place that basically oblige everyone along the value chain to observe certain minimum rules is tiny. It's 22%. 22% of countries worldwide, actually it's 23% now, so small improvement, have mandatory building energy codes. That's not enough. If you look at Africa, it goes down to 9%. That's even worse. If we look at MENA, it's 44%. So that's really good. That's double. In MENA, of course, we have the challenge of enforcement. So my answer would be the first thing is really look at the code. What does the code look like? Is it mandatory? Is it voluntary? Does it cover the entire sector or just the residential sector or just the commercial ones? And if all of those are yeses, that's a very good basis. Next thing to look at is, does the code cover the entire life cycle of the building or does it only cover the operations, for example? And then the number of countries probably shrinks even further. Quick wins. There are things that are quicker than others. I'm not sure if there are things that are really just very quick wins. It requires work and it requires analysis. But one thing that for national governments it is essential to do is certainly to use their lever, their key lever, which is public buildings and public procurement. And you have countries who are doing that. You have countries who have zero carbon policies for their public buildings. They're massively renovating their schools, their universities, their public universities, their hospitals. Tunisia, for example, they have a huge program on net zero hospitals that's quite successful. That really pushes the market. It sets up value chains and it sets up examples. Public procurement, it really cannot be that nowadays the determining factor in public procurement is usually still price. That really cannot be. I know it's the case and I work in the UN, so I'm familiar with procurement. It's not easy, but it really cannot be. The determining factor should be sustainability. And again, that would really push the market. So I'll have some more examples, but I'll leave it here for now.
Okay, another very tough question for Noura. Okay, what are the specific challenges for implementing policy in the Middle East and Africa?
Yeah, I'm, as you can probably hear, I'm not from the region, so I'm very keen. I'm here also really to listen and to learn, and the information I have, I'm 100% sure is incomplete. So really, we also rely on you, and all of everything that we do is incredibly collaborative. So once more, the invitation also for you to join. Some ideas I have, and I already mentioned it, for the MENA region, it really is the question of how do we get to the enforcement of the regulation there that does exist. I know that there are some countries where they actually have mandatory building energy codes, but the professionals literally don't even know that it is mandatory because it's just not being used. It might as well not be there. So for that, I think it's critical that the national level works much more closely with the city level because it's the cities who can really help with that. So enforcement, I think, would be my first answer. The second is unlocking finance. And this is a really funny thing, because when you start talking finance, immediately you get the reaction, yes, that's critical. And we don't have enough money. We don't have enough finance. If you talk to the finance institution, yesterday we had a meeting with the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the EBRD. They say that's not true. There is enough money. We have enough money. We can't get it out of the door because we cannot find enough bankable projects. How do we bring those two together? How is this possible that on the one hand, we hear the cities, the countries, but also small SMEs and so on saying we would, but we don't have the money, and we have the finances saying we would, but we don't have the projects. So we need to find a way to bridge that. And again, I think that's where the national government is critical. Like, what type of certifications do finance institutions need to be able to say, yes, we are funding that green building? How can national governments work with banks so that zero interest loans become the norm for energy renovation? How can national governments, sometimes you just need to prohibit things. I'm convinced of that. Like in France, for example, and apologies, this is an example from Europe, you're no longer allowed to rent out your apartment if the energy label is too low, if the energy rating is too low. From 2023 on, that's it. You can't rent it out anymore. And it really pushes people, everyone from large owners to individual owners. You just have to renovate your building, just have to do it. So these kind of things are really critical. And I think this is really, really critical here, especially the finance question. We are looking at a region where You have quite a lot of countries that are poor. You have countries that maybe aren't poor, but where finance is an issue. So we need to overcome this. Another thing that is critical for Africa, also for MENA, but I think maybe a little bit less if we just look at Africa for a moment, is addressing the informal sector. In Africa, we have over half of the buildings are informal. And you have some countries, for instance, Senegal and Ghana, where this goes up to 80–90%. If you want to address those buildings, you can't just stop at codes. You need to find other ways. You need to work with those companies that provide the materials to the home builders and so on. So I think this is another critical challenge here. And one more thing I will say, and then I will stop, is the issue of cooling. This is really an emerging challenge, I think, also for the region. How do you address that? And I think we really haven't seen anything yet. And I know we will come to resilience later, so I won't say too much, but we really haven't seen anything yet. We will see much more heat waves. We will see a rising middle class. We will see much higher demand for cooling. So this is really an emerging challenge in this region that we need to address urgently with new finance models, new incentives, and so on.
Okay, thank you, Nora. And because of the cities, we move to Dirbala. Why are cities critical in developing climate solutions, and how can we facilitate the transformation?
Thanks very much. And also just wanted to say thank you so much for hosting us all here at this very beautiful campus. So yeah, first of all, I just thought I might give a little bit of an overview of C40 cities, in case you're not aware. It's a network of over 100 leading cities. And it's a network of mayors too that are really taking strong leadership position to ensure that we're keeping 1.5 degrees within reach and that we're taking innovative solutions to combat climate change. And over the past day or so when we've been in Cairo, I think a lot of people have mentioned as well that the battle on climate change will be won or lost at the city level. And I definitely think that that's the case. Cities are really critical, I think, in ensuring, again, that we reach success at COP27. And also just to add to that, cities, I think, make up around 2% of the world's landmass, but they also generate 80% of the world's GDP, and they contribute to over 75% of energy GHG emissions. So yeah, cities really do pack a punch, and they're a really important player as well, I would say. And yeah, just adding to that as well, I think, so we can really see the important role that cities play, but I also think that we can say that cities are really where the solutions lie. At the city level, we can really see a lot of strong leadership coming from mayors. I think cities tend to be a little bit more nimble, a little bit more progressive at times than national governments, so they can really kind of drive forward transformational change. Which I think, again, is really important. So I think that, yeah, also just to add that, a lot of cities too also are these financial monetary hubs, and that they do also have a lot of political power. So they're really able, again, I think, to drive forward change and sort of start this kind of ambition loop as well by driving a lot of change and also putting a lot of pressure on national governments, particularly if they're not making the adequate change, for example, on nationally determined contributions. I think we see a lot of climate action plans at the city level that are 1.5 degree aligned. And again, I think that they're able to put the adequate pressure to ensure that we're all, trying to get towards 2030, 2050 with as much ambition as possible. And then just to add to that as well, I think that, we've already seen a lot of really great ambition at the city level. I think particularly in cities like Johannesburg and Medellin and Tokyo that are already creating this new pathway for all new buildings to be net zero by 2050. And they're also working towards their 2030 targets too. So I think that we're really seeing, a lot of drive at the city level, particularly on green buildings too. Thanks.
built environment. Yes. Yes. And especially the new development. Then how can new development address the adoption?
Yes, indeed. So in addition to the extremely fragmented sector that we have, we also have this massive challenge in that we're expecting to double the global building stock between now and 2060. And there are kind of hotspots for where that growth will be, one of which is Africa, also in Asia Pacific, in India. But that also means that half the buildings that will be here in 2060 already exist in a changing climate already, you know, to Nora's point, you know, with the kind of increasing amount of extreme weather conditions and you know, even where we're all from, we've been suffering with that recently in cities and buildings that are absolutely not built for those sorts of conditions. So it's not a case of what will be in 2050 or 2060, it's a case of what's happening now and what's going to get more extreme. And so, yes, there is a greater opportunity to influence the way a new building or a new development is designed because you're working from scratch, but we also have this enormous challenge of dealing with existing buildings and how can we be retrofitting or improving them to ensure that they're equally equipped for these changing conditions. And for us, when we talk about adaptation and resilience, we mean both protecting our built assets from climate stresses. So that's kind of long-term changes in the climate, such as the increasing temperatures we're seeing and the increasing frequency of extreme weather events, but then also climate shocks, you know, such as, you know, really unusual flooding scenarios or, you know, typhoons or kind of major weather events that again happening with more frequency. And you know, you know, some of the speakers have already mentioned, like we have a lot of the solutions in the building and construction sector to deal with our emission reductions. You know, we know that we need to be radically reducing energy consumption through energy efficiency measures. We need to be using and optimizing as much renewable energy as possible. We need to be storing that renewable energy so that we have it ready when we need to use it. We need to be thinking about passive design and how we orientate our buildings to maximize sort of wind and natural ventilation and shading through other buildings or planting trees. But there are some really specific measures that can be taken if you find that you're building a new development in an area that's particularly prone to certain climate conditions or climate extreme events. And so, you know, if you're building in an area that's prone to flooding, what can you do in terms of sort of raising living areas off the ground or using the natural landscape to help kind of channel floodwater, for example. And again, in extreme weather conditions, how can you provide, you know, shading like you have on all of your windows here at the university or trees and foliage to help reduce the external temperatures. So there are measures out there to address both emissions and kind of increasing the resilience of our built assets to climate conditions. And actually the World Green Building Council and the Climate Champions are working on a guide on how to enhance resilience within the built environment. So keep an eye out for that. But I think you'll find that many measures, many actions or solutions to a new development can help address both mitigation by reducing emissions and also enhance resilience to some of those climate events. So yeah, keep an eye out for that new guide.
Thank you, Victoria. Now, Bex, you are from the team of the high-level climate champion. And would like to learn more about the high-level climate champion and why you are always working to ensure that non-state actors are represented in the COP process.
Yeah, and appreciate that talking about the high-level climate champions can feel a bit obscure. So to set out where that role has come from, it was actually a COP21 where the role of non-state actors was acknowledged by the UNFCCC, who run the COP process, and said, okay, we need a way of bringing non-state actors, cities, regions, business, closer to this COP process. And so they created the role of the high-level climate champion. And that is a person. They're nominated by the presidency of the COP, so the host country, and they work in partnership with the presidency from the champion from the previous year. And they basically are part of the UNFCCC process, but also with the presidency, and then also with the non-state actor community. So it's this very unique bridging role. So this year, Dr. Mahilden is the climate champion for Egypt, and he's working in close collaboration with Nigel Topping, who is the champion for the UK, and I sit in their team. Why non-state actors? It was acknowledged in Paris, that was some time ago, but actually at Glasgow, as I said before, it was then acknowledged even more so and actually put into the formal text that countries need to acknowledge the role that non-state actors can play. As Dervla said about the cities, non-state actors can move faster. So cities can move faster, business can certainly move faster than national governments because it's more nimble, there's different financing, etc. But also, I think the reason why we're always championing non-state actors is to drive this big ambition loop. So if we can bring this display, this huge display of action and ambition from the non-state actor community to the COP process, that in turn exerts a bit of pressure, but what it really does is it gives the policymakers the confidence to implement the policy. Because the cities, the businesses, those who are actually going to have to act on the policy when it's put in place at national level are saying that they're ready, or saying that they're actually even further, more than ready. So it's this ambition loop that we're continually trying to drive. The non-state actors also bring the solutions. Regardless of what policy is put in place, someone on the ground is going to have to deliver something in their business or on their project or in their, even in their personal life. So the non-state actors bring the solutions, they bring the innovation, and they can also help unlock different models of execution. One particularly I think that is quite relevant is on finance. So at Glasgow last year, the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, or GFANZ, was kind of announced by Mark Carney, which is this mobilization of a huge sum of money by private sector to mobilize from banks for green projects. And so the private sector can bring also financing to the table. It can offer blended financing models with either local or national governments. It can bring innovation financing forward and say we can drive down a cost of X technology, which in turn will answer some of the challenges. So there's a lot of reasons why I think it's so critical to bring non-state actors to the COP process. And the main thing is the demonstration of action. We're proving the concept before the policymakers are putting it in place.
Okay, thank you, Lex. About resilience. Resilience is the primary objective for vulnerable communities. How do you see the built environment as the key to building resilient communities? And what do you mean by resilient communities?
Thank you. I think the second part is the harder. So we've really seen in the last years that resilience has gotten so much more traction and attention, and rightly so. And we see from our member countries, especially those from the global south, that resilience is more important to them than mitigation, and rightly so. Because the average building that is being built today is built for today's climate, but it will have to deal with the climate of 2070. So we need to future-proof our buildings, and we need to build quite differently, actually. And again, if you just look at a couple of facts and figures, and they are mostly from the African region. Overall, and I'm now talking overall, not just buildings, the African region contributes around 4% of global emissions. But the amount of people that are affected by natural disasters has tripled over the last years. And if you compare, I just happen to have those 2 years in my mind, 2001 with 2020, in 2001, we had 8% of people in the African region who were affected by natural disaster. Now it's 30%. So we're really seeing a massive increase. So we need to treat, if we're talking climate, if we're talking COP, Conference of the Parties, we certainly need to treat resilience as at least as important as mitigation. Resilience in my mind means essentially future-proofing, that you as a community, as a person, as urban space, as buildings, that you're ready to meet the future and the future climate, whether it's an increase in temperature or whether it's an increase in volatility in natural disasters. Why are buildings so critical? Well, they're at the forefront of being affected, but they're also at the forefront of being an opportunity, like energy access, for example. Again, in Africa, around 43% of people have access to energy, to electricity. Buildings are critical to pushing that number up through off-grid solutions, through solar panels, through whether and how they're connected to the grid, through district energy solutions, and so on and so on. It's really, buildings are really a hub for that. Again, we talked about cooling earlier. It's a funny thing with cooling because it's both really important for mitigation and for resilience. And cooling will drive energy demand in the future. It's not electricity, it's not lighting, it's cooling. Lighting demand in Africa is actually going down because with LEDs and efficient appliances, but cooling is going up massively. So we really need to think about designing buildings differently, having passive design solutions like Victoria said, buildings where you don't need AC or you just need minimal AC. I know in Egypt, I actually don't know it terribly well. I just know it a little bit. The example from, and I apologize for the pronunciation, it's probably wrong, the Tayabat village in El Baharia. In the Baharia, thank you, in the oasis, which was really built with both mitigation and resilience in mind. And they are using local materials, which really drives down the need for cooling. They have photovoltaic included in their roof. So it's these kind of solutions that we need to be driving. And for that, we really also need to look what are traditional building design solutions that already exist in the region, maybe have been forgotten, maybe aren't applied, because resilience certainly doesn't mean just having high-rise glass buildings everywhere. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nora. And now we will move into Derbala. Yesterday in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they tried to discuss the importance of the private sector into the sustainable cities. Then how can business and SMEs can help cities deliver actions?
Thanks very much. Yeah, and I think that was raised a few times at yesterday's workshop, and I think it's a really important question too, because I think at the city level, you know, we really see that we need to work in very close collaboration with the private sector in order to reach the level of ambition that we need to see at Cop27 and over the next few years. And I think as well, yeah, it's incredibly important as well, given that we've seen this kind of surge of ambition, you know, from Race to Zero, seeing a lot of businesses and SMEs really make these ambitious targets. So I think you can really see that the appetite is there to have this radical collaboration, I think, between cities and businesses and SMEs. Because I really see that, you know, if we want to make any kind of transformational change, you know, no one actor can really act alone. We really need to be bringing people together. So in this example, we really need to see cities working really closely with the private sector. And I think as well, even there, we had some research from C40 cities that really saw that the biggest obstacle in cities really implementing their ambitious climate action plans was this lack of collaboration with the private sector. So this is something that we really need to tackle, and we need to tackle it now. So I think that really we need to ensure that we're working really closely together as much as possible, and that we're both learning from each other. So at the city level, you know, that we're implementing the regulations at the right time, and that we're really learning as much as possible from the private sector. Because I think, as Noor was saying, that one of the key concerns we have as well is that, you know, we're always talking about, you know, the flow of finance, you know, at the city level, we need to, you know, increase this. But if we don't have the bankable projects that are re-speaking the private sector language, that we won't have this, radical collaboration that we really so desperately need. So I think that if we can really continue this conversation as much as possible and really work together, that will inevitably see these really strong, ambitious 1.5 degree aligned climate action plans being matched with private sector plans at big scale and also at SME level too. And I think that's really going to create the change that we really need to see.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dirbala. And now the next question for everybody. Two questions. From your organization's perspective, what are the examples of ambition or action you see in the building industry toward zero emissions and a resilient built environment in the region? The second question, what are your hopes and aspirations for COP27? Start with Victoria.
Sure. So I pre-pandemic, when I got to travel a lot more and speak to a lot more people from all around the world, I was very fortunate to be at an event in Jordan, and I learned from the Jordan Green Building Council that there was a program from the national government there as a result of a really drastic change in the price of energy that went from being heavily subsidized to being heavily taxed within the course of 5 years. So suddenly, we always talk about the business case for building or for green buildings, or why you should be implementing these sort of low carbon solutions. And, instantly a lot of people jump to that business case, what's the payback? And when your energy costs are very low, it's really hard to justify it on a payback basis. When your energy costs are very high, and you can save a lot of energy from a measure, then that really helps with uptake. And one of the ways that they were dealing with the challenge of energy prices was to have a program to install solar panels on mosques and schools and municipal buildings across Jordan, which had a very successful uptake, and it was fantastic to see so many of them. And of course, renewable energy generation is a really important component of decarbonizing buildings. But that alone, and I understand now that program's sort of come to an end, as these programs do, and the role of it was to stimulate the production of, or the demand for photovoltaic panels in Jordan, because it is a very core component of delivering low carbon energy to buildings, and yet can still be a very expensive capital investment. But the more that we can increase demand, then the lower the price comes down, and the faster the price comes down, the more people can buy them. And the kind of secondary benefit was that there was such a high demand for solar panels as a result that they then produced a production facility within Jordan, meaning that the solar panels are now produced locally and not brought in from sort of other countries and from halfway around the world, which then provides a market and an opportunity for kind of upskilling and for jobs and kind of clean and green jobs within the local market. And so I think that's probably my hope for COP27 is that action within the building and construction sector is seen as an opportunity, and that people are thinking about how can they, through their work, whatever capacity or industry they find themselves in, how can they be making a change or a step towards helping this sector decarbonize? And Nora mentioned earlier about the kind of gap between whether there's enough finance, but actually it's whether there's enough skills to deliver. And we need more plumbers, more electricians, more people who can help with carbon footprinting, who can help with consulting and sort of help demonstrate what the solutions are that are out there, because these are really prime jobs and absolutely essential to help us deliver on the targets that we're bringing to COP27. And if we're successful, then we're then going to need to act on them. So I guess that's kind of my hope, that people see it as a really exciting industry to be a part of and to be doing something that helps us get us closer to those goals.
Okay, thank you, Victoria. Now we move to Bex for the same two questions.
Okay. I think examples in the region, I think you can put them in different categories. I think one is, sending that demand signal to the value chain is extremely critical. And actually, we're talking to a construction company yesterday who said, well, we'll just do it on our projects. We don't need to, you know, join the race to zero or make a big statement. And we took some time to discuss that and actually just explain to them, you need to all recognize as businesses, as cities, your own influence. And just by them making that public statement, they would in turn influence their entire supply chain, because their cement supplier, their steel supplier, whatever it might be, has to step back and go, oh, okay, that organization have made this commitment. For them to procure from me, I need to start to, you know, change a few things in my business as well. So I think there is some great examples of just sending that demand signal. I mean, one is through World Green Building Council's net zero carbon buildings commitment. That's a pure demand signal in its purest form, where it says we as an organization will only occupy effectively net zero carbon buildings. And we've got one signatory in the room. Deutsche Bank have just signed, they've got 6,000 buildings. African Logistics have just signed. That's the first kind of big African company to join. So, you know, they are really great demand signals. And I think we talk about action, but we need to remember that we need that influence piece as well. In terms of action, I think there's a whole range of great stuff going on from low tech to high tech. You know, I was reading about, and again, I might do some bad pronunciation like Nora, Baharea village. Yeah, that's the same one. The farming community, yeah, that by eConsult. And just low tech solutions, right? It's not, these aren't big kind of mind-blowing solutions. It's rotate your building orientation to reduce solar gain. It's raise your first floor slightly off the ground so you don't absorb heat from the earth. Things like that to reduce the energy demand. Another interesting company is an organization called Real, spelled real with 2 L's. Their focus is on low carbon affordable housing in Africa and in Asia. And they call that a $17 trillion global market opportunity. So that they're not a not-for-profit. They're investing in low carbon affordable homes for profit, because they know that that is a huge market for them. And what they do is they invest in small companies that have an innovation, whether that's a modular home or whether that's a certain cooling technology, and they provide the kind of incubation finance to scale up that innovation. And in turn, they collect a lot of data to then create the business case to take to the banks, to take to the national governments, to say, okay, we'll bring X amount of these homes to your city if you provide X amount of green mortgages, for example, for the communities. So that's a really interesting and different model. And sometimes it is these slightly disruptive models that will really make change happen kind of at pace, at scale. There's so many more examples. My hope for COP27, I'd forgotten about this question. Firstly, that I get to spend more time in Egypt and see the pyramids, which we haven't managed to do. But no, I think really what I really hope for COP27 is that we change the narrative from what are the barriers, you know, I see all these panel events, what are the barriers to green buildings? What are the challenges to green buildings? Like, I don't care about the barriers and the challenges anymore. We can talk about solutions, we can talk about action, and we have the solutions. We know what the challenges are. We've been talking about them for 10 years, but we also know how to overcome them. So my hope is that this narrative really shifts and we showcase fantastic examples, fantastic innovations, and we do that in a humble and open and transparent way so that we share this knowledge as far and wide as we can, and that we keep driving forward.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Bex. And now we move to Nora to answer the same question or to comment on the same questions.
Thank you. So before I go to examples, just want to throw out there 2 more figures that Bex's and Victoria's interventions reminded me of. Jobs, yeah, I think we need to be much better on highlighting all these incredible benefits that we're getting from making our buildings more sustainable. So for every $1 million invested into energy efficiency in buildings, you get between 9 and 30 jobs. I don't know how impressive it sounds to you, but it does sound impressive if you compare it to other energy efficiency work in other sectors. It's way more than other sectors. So you get big bang for your buck as a government, not just in terms of savings, but really also in terms of jobs. And these are usually local jobs. Investment, thanks for pointing out Real, the fantastic work they're doing. Overall, the estimate is that green buildings is a $24 trillion investment opportunity by 2030. So really, it's almost insane that there is not a bigger run on this by banks and others. So just wanted to throw out those two figures. Okay, examples. So let me try to also say that there are different types of examples. So I'm going to start at a sort of macro policy level. First thing, NDCs. I'm not sure how familiar you are with that term, nationally determined contributions. It's the pledges that countries make at COP, at the Conference of Parties, of like emission reduction overall. We actually, you know where the most ambitious, almost 1.5 degree aligned NDC is, and the only one that exists, it's Morocco. So it's here in this region. Morocco has the only NDC that is almost 1.5 degree aligned. It's the most ambitious NDC currently. So that is a fantastic signal to the world and to the market in Morocco. We need much, much more on that. They have really good stuff on buildings in their NDC as well, but just also their overall NDC is very ambitious, comparatively speaking. So that's my first thing, NDCs. Second thing is really forging pathways. I know these things sound macro and maybe abstract, but they really are important. So at the Global ABC, but also other organizations like the World Green Building Council, we have roadmap models. How do you get to transform the entire buildings and construction sector, not just one single buildings? What do you need to do? What are the priority steps by 2030, by 2050? At the Global ABC, we're using 8 categories. I'll list them. Obviously, you don't need to memorize them, but just to show you that we're trying to be holistic. It includes urban planning. It includes new buildings, existing buildings, operations, resilience, clean energy, and materials, and appliances. So those are the 8 ones. Now, we're starting to see some of our country members, they're taking our model and they're taking our template and they're just running with it. And that's great. It's like a franchise. This is all in the public domain. Anybody can use it. So the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, which are also the host of Cop28, they've taken our model and they are developing building decarbonization roadmaps in those 8 categories for 22 Arab states. So states in the MENA and the North African region. That's really great. We think this is fantastic. We need much more of that because that ensures that the countries have the framework in place, that you don't just, for example, change the light bulbs in your buildings, that you're really transforming the entire sector. So that's my second example. Third example is on the ground, we're seeing some really great stuff happening. For instance, the Burkina Faso architect, Francis Curé, I think he just won the Pritzker Prize. And one of the reasons why he won the Pritzker Prize is because he's doing some really, really innovative work based on local design, locally available materials with local communities. Those are the kind of solutions we need to see, and they're really happening. The problem is that they're not always happening in scale, but it is starting. Or Mass Design, an architectural firm, they're very active in Rwanda. They have built up entire supply chains for alternative materials. And thanks to their work on this level, this is now being taken to the regulatory level. So to Bex's point, we need the top-down approach, but also the bottom-up approach can also then enable the top-down approach, so to say. So I'll leave it there. Those are my examples. Thank you. Oh, Hub for Governor, yeah, thank you. Okay, my hope is really that we see everyone around the table pulling on the same string, so that we have the private sector frontrunners that are showing to the national governments, don't you dare use as argument that the private sector doesn't want regulation. We are here, we are frontrunners, we have gone way past the existing regulation. It is possible. My hope is that the cities are saying, those who are frontrunners are showing that that's doable, and those who are not yet frontrunners saying we want to become frontrunners, and that national governments are really stepping up ambition, that everybody will have an NDC that is 1.5 degree aligned, that are making these pledges, and that they're putting the necessary means for action on the table. So concrete policies and finance. Thanks.
Thank you, Nora. And now we will move to Derbala for the same questions.
Thanks. I think one of the kind of key examples that I'm I'll draw on as well is one of the C40 South Africa building programs that's currently working with Cape Town and Durban, Johannesburg and Tshwane as well. And that's basically really to help support them in advancing their plans towards getting net zero buildings in place in new buildings by 2030 and all buildings by 2050. And this is again a really, really ambitious commitment to be making, and it's highly linked to these new net zero building accelerators that we have at C40 cities as well. So I think that we can really see that this is really driving a lot of change within the region, and cities are really kind of stepping up and making really rapid changes in a very fast-paced environment. And really, again, this is really linked to the city climate action plans that they have in place. And I've already been like incredibly impressed by the sheer amount of 1.5 degree aligned climate action plans that I've seen, particularly in Africa, and also I think Lagos recently as well has really defined their 1.5 degree aligned climate action plan, and it's really, really impressive to see this kind of momentum growing again, I think, within Africa as well, especially in the run up to Cop27. I think it's just really great to see this, and I think it's really going to encourage again more and more action, you know, across the non-state actor space as well, and really seeing kind of cities make these really ambitious targets on buildings and again more broadly in their action plans is really going to encourage, I think, businesses as well to really step up to the plate. And yeah, just as well on the program that I was just mentioning as well, that it's really kind of helping that capacity building as well, I think, which is something that I think that a lot of people have been talking about recently. So we really need, you know, the expertise as well to kind of help this along. And I think having the embedded advisors as well to really, you know, help cities that really want to, you know, take the charge and be really, you know, innovative in specific sectors, you know, especially in the built environment too. I think, yeah, it's really important, and we're seeing a lot of this, you know, growing and growing, which is, again, really impressive to see. But then in terms of the second question that you asked, I think was around, you know, the hopes and aspirations again for COP27. And I think probably in quite a broad sense, you know, I'm really obviously keen to see, you know, cities and the built environment as well play a really important role, and that there's a lot of visibility. Again, that's like part of the reason why we're here in Cairo, is to really kind of champion the role of cities and the important role of the built environment, and ensure that we're really kind of taking, you know, stage at COP27 to demonstrate the great action that's been taken so far, and the great commitments that have been made. But I would just say to add to that, I think that, you know, at COP26 we saw so much impressive, ambitious commitments being made. But I know that this year, you know, everyone's calling this COP27 as the implementation COP. So I think in terms of like what I really want to see is to see, you know, 1.5 degree aligned climate action plans. Also, you know, 1.5 degree NDCs or nationally determined contributions. You know, want to see these climate targets being made at the city level and at the national level. Yeah, I mean, I think that we haven't really seen the same amount of NDCs that have been submitted at this point. So I'm really hoping that this is going to change, and that we're going to see mayors and ministers and CEOs all kind of coming to COP27 and really demonstrating progress against the commitments that they've already committed to at COP26, and that this is just going to grow more and more momentum, and that we're going to see even more implementation again at COP28. Thanks.
Thank you. And last question, which is optional to have to have room for Q&A session. Your last comment, if any, not mentioned before, and you would like to conclude it, or you would like to elaborate more. It's an optional.
No, I think we're good. Yeah. Should we see if anyone has any questions?
Sure, we will. Any questions from the audience or from the online audience?
Yeah, we've got a few.
Sure, Dr. Karim.
Can you hear me? Okay. So I have a question related to the role of universities in this, because throughout the presentation, like your talks, you didn't say anything about universities. What is the role of the universities? What can we do to be part of these initiatives, to have a presence in COP27 and in your initiatives of green buildings?
Yeah, I maybe jump in. That's an omission on my part, and I should have said that. Non-state actors does include universities, it does include NGOs, it does include kind of large organizations that don't necessarily fall into the corporate world. So we do have, lots of universities who have joined the Race to Zero, which is one of the climate champions in the UN kind of campaigns. So as a university, they've calculated their portfolio of greenhouse gas emissions, and they've set targets to halve those by 2030 and be net zero by 2050, if not before. So that's definitely one way that universities can get involved. I think when we're thinking specifically on buildings, universities own and operate huge portfolios of building stock. And so, they are looking at, I guess, sometimes a new build challenge, but more often than not, a retrofit challenge to drive down the operational emissions of the building stock that they already have, whilst ensuring that it's fit for purpose for study and for their students. So I think, a huge part of interest that I've seen from universities is on the energy efficiency side. How can we make our existing stock as efficient as possible, and in turn, therefore, drive down the energy intensity and the need for energy? And then the kind of third step, move to renewable energy supply. So yeah, I think as both kind of owners of huge swathes of stock, that's aside from then their capacity as teachers and educators to the youth that is going to come forward and work in what will be, all industries will be climate industries, right, by 2030, 2040. So that's obviously a huge role to play. And then I think there's also a huge advocacy role to play. Universities are influential in their own countries and their own cities. They are huge employers in cities. They bring loads to the economy. So universities have a role to play to advocate to national governments, to local governments, that they want to see change. So I think there's so many different roles that university can play. And sorry for not speaking to those sooner.
I was the former Minister of Petroleum in Egypt, and I am an adjunct faculty in the Petroleum School in the AUC. Dr. Karim, I have an answer complementary to what you have said, because I have an initiative for the COP27 in different parts. But regarding universities and buildings, in Alexandria University, we are forming a company, a business-based company for water, energy, and service company, using the faculty, using the students as a workforce to promote the concept of having the energy conservation and energy efficiency as a new source of energy. So having this disseminated to all the students and their homes and their families, and they will be working on graduation projects, on research projects to make this company succeed in starting with the campus. And they will be doing the auditing, getting new ideas, implementing these ideas, and then going to the market for either the municipalities or the ideas starting from, because Alexandria had zero air conditioning in 10, 20 years ago. They didn't use any air conditioning in the buildings. Now you rarely see a building without an AC. So we are studying, starting from a holistic view of using the computational fluid dynamics to see how the path of air can reduce the temperature and then applying this to certain buildings and maybe removing some of the buildings, building another. So we are, this is a good role of an application for this, and this company will have the Central Bank of Egypt as a shareholder, because the money will come back from if they contract any building, they will see how much they are paying for water and electricity, and then the standard template of a service company that is not applied in Egypt. We want to have this as an example for the 50 universities in Egypt that are in all over the country. So this is
sounds fantastic. I mean, innovation, access to finance, you know, it's a real disruptor to the market. So I'd love to learn more.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe we'll follow up. But it sounds fantastic.
Thank you for sharing.
Yes, definitely. Okay, can you hear me now? Okay. My name is Nuran Marsafi. I'm a project manager at Habitat for Humanity Egypt. Actually, I have two questions. My first question is for Noura. You've mentioned Tazilia Bahariya, okay? And the thing is, you were talking about a very niche market, ecotourism example, that has its like business cycle going from the tourism. But how can we implement something like this for grassroots when we're dealing with the informality as an ocean? Because I think it's pretty like questionable here. The second thing that like it raised, what do you mean by disruptive practices? Because you've mentioned this is a disruptive practice. I would like to understand what do you mean by it. Thank you.
Yes, well, this is a really important and a big question. I wish I had a very clear answer and a solution for you, and I don't. I just maybe have some ideas. You know, it's funny because sometimes you see these niches and you think, well, this is great, but it's just a niche. So, you know, you might as well ignore it. But really, when I look at where we stand today, when it comes to buildings, where we stand today, when it comes to the whole discussion about climate change and environment, my God, I mean, it's really getting to the center of the economy, and it's really blown up very quickly. So these niches are incredibly important. So I'm just my 2 cents on don't lose hope, even if it's just a niche. You know, honestly, I think especially in markets where you don't have a mandatory building energy code yet, like is the case for Egypt, it's really, really important to work much more with certifications, because these can be absolutely crucial to unlocking the finance. So I'm coming again back to EBRD. My colleagues have heard me say this, I think, for the 3rd time now, because I think it was a fascinating example. The EBRD, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, they, for financing buildings, and they're one of the ones who are saying we really don't have a really don't have a money problem, we have a bankable project problem. For financing green buildings, they can accept 3 labels. That's LEED, BREEAM, and EDGE. Now, my understanding in Egypt, but I might be wrong, I am really not an expert on Egypt in particular, is that I think currently there are 22 buildings in Egypt who are LEED certified. 22. I don't think BREEAM really has a market here. EDGE is higher, I'm sure, because EDGE is quite well used in Africa. But my point is, it's really important to work with these finance institutions and see can they also unlock finance for some of the certifications that are being used in the markets. Like here, I think you have the Green Pyramid Scheme. Either that, or can the labels, can the certifications be adapted in such a way that they can be used? That's one thing. The other thing is, yeah, with the informality, honestly, it's a very tricky question. It's a very important, but it's a very tricky topic. One thing that strikes me as really important is to work with the material providers, with those that provide the bricks, with the SMEs that the home builders are using. And right now, the work that's being done with construction companies or with architectural, with design companies, and so a lot of the sustainability work that's being done is more being done with the large companies. I think we have a real gap in working with smaller companies, with SMEs, or even with 1 or 2 women companies. I think there's a gap here. And to address what you said, we need to close that gap.
I think we have to stop here because they have to catch their airplane. And thank you very much, Victoria, Bix, and Nora, and Durbala for the very interesting talk.